December, the month that brings snow in the northern hemisphere and sun to the southern. But whether you're in a code freeze or shining a light on bugs, your apps are going to be insurmountable if you're not prepared for the terrain. Which means, this week, we speak with Mike Manrod from Grand Canyon University, along with John Delaroderie from Qualys about the latest web app threats, vulns, and where in the world is modern scan the repo. In the news segment, AWDL lets iPhone data go AWOL. The Web Security Testing Guide gets a minor bump for major documentation, while Cross-Site Leaks gets its own travel brochure. GitHub surveys its Octaverse for insights. We explore the myths and ruins of DevOps, and more. Grab a map and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences patented technology protects any application against any attack with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. In a fast-paced tech environment, the potential attack surface increases with each release and new app created. Detectify automates cutting-edge knowledge from trusted ethical hackers into the development pipeline for reliable application security. Go beyond the OWASP Top 10. Check your web apps for over 2,000 known vulnerabilities actively exploited in the wild, monitor subdomains for potential takeovers, and remediate security issues in staging and production. Learn more with a free trial at securityweekly.com/Detectify. Go hack yourself. By connecting to your code repository, Accurix generates a topology across your full stack to reveal risks so that you can harden your architecture. It also scans code for violations against compliance and security standards to enforce best practices. In addition, Accurix develops threat models using vulnerability feeds, IAM privileges, and other data to predict potential breach paths. Learn how easy it is to get started with Accurix at securityweekly.com/Accurix.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 133, recorded December 7th, 2020. I'm your guide, Mike Shima. Joining this expedition is Matt Alderman. Hello, Matt.
G'day, mate.
And John Kinsella, who is going to also surprise us with his own accent. Hello, John.
I was just thinking, I wasn't lucky enough to get a free trip down to Australia this weekend.
Well, John, please keep your hands and arms inside the boat and don't feed the animals. Scythe is offering a free Purple Team workshop where attendees get hands-on for 3 hours in an isolated enterprise environment. It's scheduled for December 9th, which is the day before Security Weekly Unlocked. Register for this free workshop now at securityweekly.com/purpleteamsw. And speaking of Unlocked, Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, that's this Thursday, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15th anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly live on YouTube. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to view the agenda and register for free. Mike Manrod presently serves as the CISO for Grand Canyon Education, responsible for leading the security team and formulating the vision and strategy for protecting students, staff, and information assets across the enterprise. Previous experience includes serving as a threat prevention expert for Check Point and working as a consultant and analyst for other large enterprise customers. He is also a co-author/contributor for the joint book project, Understanding New Security Threats, published by Routledge in 2019. And we also have John Delaroderie, who is a security solution architect and subject matter expert for web application scanning. He's been with Qualys since early 2018, and prior to that, he worked for a variety of government agencies and private organizations in the fields of cybersecurity, incident response, digital forensics, and systems integrations. Hello, Mike and John. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Super glad to be here. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you all. And Mike, we'd love to hear about what modern web app threats are, but I think rather than just the large catalog of what they could be, especially as a CISO from your perspective, what are the threats that you see that are really driving the strategy or just driving the decisions that you have to make when you look at all of those web apps and, of course, more that you really need to be protecting?
Well, it's a great question, Johnny. I'm so glad you asked. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the way we need to orient our web application strategy is first to look at how people are attacking. At the end of the day, we spend a lot of time, perhaps too much time at times, on all the attacks that involve user interaction. But there's a whole lot of attacks, a category of attacks against our web attack surface that really we won't see coming until it's too late, unless we're doing the proper assessment. Now, part of that is proactive in terms of discovery and remediation. Part of that is reactive in terms of, proactive reactive in terms of putting the right controls in and responding. But at the end of the day, our web attack surface is a really big target, an often neglected target. And sometimes it's an area where organizations don't know what they don't know as far as where they're weak.
Yeah, and what they don't know is got to be that combination of things we talk about here all the time, that inventory, what do you have and how can you protect it? But I'm curious, when you say that last part about they don't know what to protect, how are you going about finding out what you should protect? And second part of that question now is, I'll throw this out there too, is how much confidence do you have in identifying, this inventory or finding out what you should be protecting?
Well, there's a few factors. The discovery piece, we have to scan, right? We have to scan, we have to inventory, we have to merge together the data from our CMDBs and our application inventory with what we're actually finding when we scan. And then mapping those applications to importance, to risk categorization, and to what the applications do, to what information they map to, and then continuously assess what vulnerabilities exist. As far as confidence level, I would say we're always graded on a scale, right? We all start our web app journey at a place of great vulnerability. And I'd say none of us ever reach perfection. We continuously strive to improve, but organizations evolve as we're improving. So it's always a moving target. It's difficult for sure.
Mike,
yeah, and I think...
Sorry, Mike, I wanted to get in here a quick question, because he said something extremely interesting to me, right? I need to get my inventory, I need to align it to my CMDB, and then I need to align it to my risks. That's 3 different systems for you, Mike? How are you pulling all that data together to make sure you've got the right focus on your inventory?
Well, it used to be several different systems. We're lucky enough right now, we're using Qualys for 2 different things that unify very well. We have WAS, the Web Application Security, doing our scanning, our vulnerability, our app risk. We're using VMDR to categorize our asset risk and what assets those apps run on. So that part's very unified. And then we do bring that data into Splunk, our SIM, so that we can contextualize threats on the IR and SOC side, so that when we see an event, whether it's from the WAF, from a firewall, from another tool, from NDR, we can contextualize that with all the continuous data we're getting on both the asset risk and the application risk.
No, that's awesome. I have to say, I should also say up front that I spent 8 years at Qualys writing a lot of the code, which both Valgrind and GCC gave me some good, honest feedback about. But writing the code for that web application scanner, so it's great to hear that it is one of those components that's helping you, secure your environment. I'm also curious too, as you're bringing these 3 systems together to be able to understand what you might be protected from. Maybe tell us a little bit more what the threats that you are seeing. And is it just the simple basics of phishing and cross-site scripting? Are you seeing something that perhaps is a little bit more interesting or even a little bit more complex to try to counter in 2020?
So one, I'm going to have to make sure I send you a Christmas thank you card for your contributions. I really like the scanner you contributed to. I've used several, and it's the first one that I've looked at and been like, all right, this is giving us what we need. I really like it. So good job. In terms of the threats, there's a few layers, right? We tend to default to cliches of what's easy to fix, not what's easy to attack. And there's some fundamental problems. One, yes, XSS is a big deal. And that's protecting others from the abuse of your web apps, right? If we have an unchecked XSS vulnerability and we don't have WAF or controls in front of it that mitigate it, if we leave it out there too long, all these things compound the risk together. If we allow that condition to exist, our web app resources are used to attack others via phishing. So that's really bad, and that phishing then has a much higher believability and trust level. That said, I think sometimes when we focus on that too much, we miss the fact that things like SQL injection, remote code execution, reverse web shells are a real tactic. And I think that organizations will use this web entry point two ways. One, sometimes they'll start there. There's a lot of automated scanning and indexing to find what's weak, then either sell that information or use that information to attack directly. And sometimes it's against the applications, sometimes it's against the servers or load balancers that they're running on. So at the end of the day, we have to be dealing with all three of those in a unified way. Are people able to traverse directories to resources we don't want them to see? Are they able to brute force or abuse tokens? Are they able to do injection attacks? Or are they able to drop a file and get a reverse web shell? So I think these are all things we have to be thinking about because people are really doing them all the time.
Well, I'm going to return the favor now and send you a Christmas thank you for mentioning directory traversal, which is my favorite vulnerability of all time. As you're describing that, it also makes me wonder, you've got a lot of tools, a lot of attention that you're placing on these types of attacks and how your web applications can be abused. I'm curious, how are you organizing these tools in the sense of who's responsible for them? Is it the dev team, sort of a DevOps team, a security team, or just how does that look like in the sense of we've got tools, we have information, but how do we share it and make decisions or respond to them?
It really is a great question, Johnny. I think the more we try to silo and centralize security and other IT functions, the worse off we are. So I feel like really what we've tried to do is empower developers to develop secure code, where we immediately took it from, hey, this is a security thing, don't touch it. Our journey has included empowering them with the tools, the reports, the ability to scan before they get to a QA or release the prod tollgate, but while they're actually developing and doing unit testing before they move further up the pipeline. And obviously we're working to apply more automation and give more automated feedback along our journey. But I really think it takes a village. Like the sysadmins need to be able to understand what's vulnerable about the servers. The networking team needs to understand what's vulnerable about the network infrastructure. And of course, the developers and QA teams need a very similar level of visibility that we have on the security team into the actual app vulnerabilities and how they're being exploited.
Now, that sounds like quite a lot of wrangling and a lot of people, talking together, coordinating. I'm curious, as you've learned over that, is there something in particular that you found was a really good technique for getting that to that level of maturity? And I'm sort of thinking along the lines of perhaps even less so of a technical and a tool focused, but more of an organizational or like a people management, interpersonal skills. Is there something there that you would highlight that for other people to adopt and be able to go down this route that you've taken?
Sure. I would say it really does start with people. The first step is building relationships, building trust, going out to lunch with the key leaders, doing joint team meetings and reoccurring meetings where you can get everybody in the same room together, or right now the same Zoom together, to connect and realize, oh, they're not just a bunch of developers trying to fling out whatever. They're actually people trying to do the right thing who maybe are trying to learn, but also trying to get a job done. And for them to realize, oh, the security people aren't just the evil no people. But part of it comes down to workflows and transparency, and the technical piece really does make a difference. Being able to have access controls within the security tools to where you can, okay, some things we don't want to show everybody. We do need appropriate access controls, but let's be as transparent as we can cross-functionally so that developers can kick off their own scans, view their own results, and kind of interact with the data.
Yeah, Mike, I think it's interesting, the integration of the different security tools and the data into the developer tools is an important part. I'm curious how you've approached that in your organization of how do you give that access to that data? Is it giving the developers access to the security tool, or is it integrating some of the security tool data into their tools, into their pipeline?
Well, that's a really great question as well. So I feel like part of that piece is actually it's a two-step process. It's very much a crawl, walk, run kind of thing. In the beginning, there probably isn't enough mutual trust, mutual access, and joint knowledge to necessarily integrate with the dev pipeline at step one. So step one is often the security team taking the first step of kind of opening up a bit to let the developers into their world. I will say though, once that matures a bit, the ultimate goal is to be able to integrate with the dev pipeline and provide the security data with the developers in their own context, in what they're used to seeing and working in.
Yeah, so a lot of this sounds like that. I love that idea of crawl, walk, run. It's a lot of the phrase that I go back to quite often. I'm curious too, when you're looking at these threats and looking for the security tools to bring into them, are there certain criteria that you've focused on in that selection? Because you have, just now you were talking about integration. So I'm going to guess a lot of that means API integration rather than and access controls. So rather than having developers hop over to different web tabs and the tools themselves, are you actually pulling in that data into their IDEs or into other areas of where the developer is already working, or are you bringing them to the tool and over time collapsing that all together?
Well, I'll take that in reverse order. In the beginning, it was very much just getting them into our tools. Now we're actually doing joint projects to integrate with the pipeline, and APIs were a critical part of that, as well as usability. So in the beginning, we used usability as a criteria with APIs as the end, beginning with the end in mind, so that one, we could train a developer in a 1-hour meeting how to do what they need to do. And the tools we use, within Qualys were very user-friendly for that. But then the API selection was really a key piece. And we worked with APIs of other products where, one, it was complex, two, not every feature worked, and three, it changed. Every time we thought we'd pin it down, it would shift a little. We've been very happy with the WAS and Qualys APIs in that as we've integrated the data into Splunk and we began work on integrating the connection into our dev pipelines, the APIs have been simple, well-documented, and easy to work with. So that's been very helpful.
Cool.
It'd be interesting.
Oh, so go ahead, John.
Sorry, Mike. What'd be interesting to sort of hear, so you're telling a really great story for, how you guys have, really brought the security information to the devs, how you're using the Qualys tools, how you think about AppSec from a scan and defend point of view, or scan and fix. Maybe, I was just looking at your website and your LinkedIn. So Grand Canyon Education, you're really sort of specializing in dealing with the stuff that I'm going to say universities aren't good at, by which I mean the IT aspects which have come along over the last 20 years, right? A bunch of us here at Security Weekly have spent time into higher education. So maybe talk a little bit about, you've been at this at GCU for a few years, and I think 3 or 4 years. Congratulations. But talk a little bit about how has the life cycle of both discovering issues, fixing issues, how are you maturing? It'd be sort of probably interesting for listeners to think about an organization which you don't have the baggage of a university, by which I mean the research and the doctorates and the students and all that. But so you're focusing on the IT side of things, at least how I see it. And how are you sort of attacking security within that? Do you think that makes it easier or more difficult, or just be sort of curious to hear your thoughts on that in general?
Well, I'd say the first thing I'd say is we actually do both. So we do the IT side for GCU, so we have that aspect. And we contribute to some of the thought leadership stuff as well, like the Cyber Center of Excellence, and we give input into curriculum. But we definitely, one of the cool parts of the GCE security posture and technology posture is it was greenfield when we built it, so we were able to take a much more idealistic approach. But I would say when we look at our security posture, both in terms of vulnerability discovery and response, we've had to make that fairly agile to deal with things that have been around for a long time and that do have some of the traditional university type limitations. But we've also had the opportunity to build some processes around a greenfield environment that was built much more idealistically from a more recent standpoint. In terms of process, one mistake I made early on was to try to apply everything from kind of a more rigid enterprise GRC framework in terms of tracking and remediating risk. And I've had to dial that back a little bit, make it a little more collaborative and figure out, okay, how can we get the tracking, the governance, the management, but also make it feel collaborative and non-bureaucratic? So that's been a work in process, but I feel like we're getting there.
A lot of what you've been describing too near the end there was starting to step into, John was mentioning, I think, some of the legacy and the complexity of university networks. And you were starting to describe too a little bit of being able to step in and make things better. It sounds like, and where I'm going with this is talking a little bit about design or putting security into the design phase as a feedback loop from the vulnerabilities that you're discovering here. And for those of you who aren't watching, who are just listening, Mike, behind you, it looks like you have a on-prem rack. But I'm curious with modern environments, if moving to the cloud or having cloud deployments, if if Grand Canyon has adopted a lot of that, how that has affected your crawl, walk, run approach, both in terms of vulnerability scanning, being able to find asset inventory, but also are you able to go and do different things design-wise and protecting those applications based on the types of vulnerabilities or even the threats that you're becoming aware of?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So there's twofold, right? On one hand, I'm definitely a home lab enthusiast, but I'm also a huge cloud enthusiast. I feel like when we're building things for the future, they really do need to be cloud first and cloud centric, at least where it makes sense, which is a lot of places. And I think our AppSec needs to adapt from, we've had this evolution from physical to virtual to cloud and containerization. There's new disciplines like figuring out when do you host something on-prem, when do you host something in cloud infrastructure. I do think, though, our vulnerability management and our security protection tools, such as web application firewall, need to be cloud first, cloud enabled, and cloud focused, with the ability to adapt to protect on-prem. Also, we don't want to take approaches that hairpin us into on-prem and that can't scale or adapt well to the cloud.
So then looking forward now, sort of turning, we're in December, the end of 2020, or at least many of us are crossing our fingers that this year can end. Looking forward to 2021, are there certain things that you are planning to do, either whether it is what you're anticipating the threats are going to be for the upcoming year, if they'll in fact be different, or is there something in terms of, as you've been describing, that maturity of crawl, walk, run, that you want to run a little bit better in your vulnerability or your threat management capabilities?
Sure, and definitely, and I see those two as fused. I really think purple team is the future, and what we used to look at as perhaps different topics erroneously are really becoming one topic, right? It's understanding the vulnerabilities and remediating them, adapting controls to protect them, and then maturing our IR, our SOC and IR and threat hunting processes to both find where those things are failing or almost failing, and then have that feedback loop circle all the way over to vulnerability management. In terms of what I'm focusing on the new year, part of it is automation. It's this automation and orchestration piece, whether it's integrating the vulnerability management processes and web app security processes with the dev pipeline, automating a lot of the triage within SOC and IR, or the piece of being able to automate configuration so that if you block a threat in one place, it's across the entire security stack. That said, I'd say even more important than that it's increasing our skill level and building our purple team expertise in the new year so that our incident responders better understand applications. Our pen testing and vulnerability apparatus is integrating more thoroughly in the response process, and that we're really engaging together using contests, using courses, using CTFs, using whatever means we can to elevate our teamwork across the team so that we can better respond and then use the response to inform our control stack and our vulnerability remediation.
I want to bring John into this discussion for a second, because what Mike just laid out, I think, is interesting when you think about it from a vendor perspective for a second, right? The concept of purple teaming, where you've got the red team side, the penetration testing side, tied in to the defense side and even the remediation side. I'm wondering how customers like Grand Canyon are influencing Qualys's roadmap around this concept of purple teaming.
Sure. Well, I think we can't talk about security in isolation. You know, the concept of having a red team or a blue team where there's no communication, there's no interaction. That's hard. It's almost becoming a arbitrary situation where it's unrealistic for how these attacks and defenses will really go. So yes, definitely the cooperation between the two is going to not only help you identify vulnerabilities that you may not know about, because each team is going to have their own perspective on how to approach security, but the cooperation between the two is also going to more align you with really what your advanced adversaries are going to do, right? They're going to have all this research about your networks, your infrastructure that you use, the firewalls that are in place, the web application vulnerabilities that may exist before they start to attack you and try to do these exploits. So when you have that synergy between your red team and blue team, where you are creating a more accurate threat landscape for what the adversary is going to see, because there is this communication about this is the infrastructure we have, the technologies we have in place, and the security measures that we have to try to protect those, then yeah, I think that creates a more realistic attack scenario that you can then protect against to provide a more in-depth attack analysis and prevention. And yeah, as far as like Qualys and how we move our tools, as you guys know, we're always taking feedback from the field, from how our customers are implementing it, so that we can drive new processes and features. And a lot of times, this is going to be with the integrations that were referenced earlier, where with our API, you can integrate this early into your DevOps process so that as your engineers are working, they're able to get artifacts from vulnerability scans right into their build processes to keep them secure, so that it's no longer independent silos of teams working together, working independently, but rather everybody working together for a common security solution for their enterprise.
Yeah, great. I mean, when I heard what Mike was doing, I'm like, well, the only thing Qualys is missing is a SIM. Just saying.
Yeah, we do have a lot of integrations that we're working on to try to share this information broadly. So, you know, maybe down the road, that'll be something that we'll be introducing to.
Yeah, Matt can't resist the keeping his product management, product visions hat on for sure. John, I'm curious too. Is a lot of what stood out, you know, as I heard what you were describing, you weren't, you know, presenting tools, you're presenting the solution to actually problems that people have, and a lot of that was sharing the data that's coming in from various tools, enabling people to work better with it. I'm curious too, as you, and maybe this is a question for both you, John, and Mike, as you're having these discussions, especially with someone like a CISO, what are the major problem that they're bringing up to you, that perhaps even saying, let's automate this or let's have a tool, isn't quite the right way to bring the solution to that problem, but better understanding the problem? Or maybe that was a bit confusing as I asked that as I'm listening to myself. So let me rephrase it this way. How would you express one of the major problems that you are seeing CISOs have that you would really like to see either solutions do a better job of, or for vendors even to better understand how they should be positioning their solutions for that?
Well, I can say that as a security solution architect, when I talk to customers, there's always hesitation on these information security teams to have conversations with the app developers or the server admins. They think a tool is going to be able to solve everything for them, and the tool is going to give them a lot of information, whether it's us or some other product. But at the end of the day, you still need to understand how those products work. And if you're just running a scan and passing on those results without a dialogue, without that effective communication, those results aren't going to go anywhere. That's one of the biggest problems that keeps coming up to me. And my response is always to the customer, you probably need to have a conversation with your app developers to understand this, or with your server admins to figure out what's going on here, because the tool's only going to get you to that door. You're going to have to knock on it and have that one-on-one conversation. And I believe Mike was even talking about the, taking the teams out and getting to know them, so that when you do interact with them, you're not talking to a stranger for the first time. And so that's very important. And then you guys have already touched on the inventory problem. Nobody really knows what all they have out there. And again, I always say you need to have that conversation with the people in your organization, because somewhere somebody's paying for servers. They should know what's on those servers to be able to identify your web applications.
Mike, any final comments? Any final thoughts from you? We'll give you the last word as the CISO here.
So I agree with everything John just said, and I think that was spot on. I'll just build on that by saying I think one of the keys to build credibility, and it takes time to evolve here, is when developers say something's a false positive, being able to either prove them right or prove them wrong. One thing I've loved about WAS is it provides enough context to be able to quickly build an exploit to prove if it's really exploitable. And I feel like when you can prove what the scanner is saying, articulate how to exploit it and why, or concede that, okay, this really is a false positive, we couldn't exploit it, that builds credibility with developers and unification across teams.
No, that's great. Yeah, and I think you've given us a very true positive in this discussion of how you've approached that crawl, walk, run, the collaboration with your teams, and you're actually at least the second person to mention taking out the team for lunch, which may be a bit more difficult right now, but building that relationship with the developers. So we also appreciate you coming here and building up a quick relationship with us and having this discussion. So thanks again, Mike and John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Also want to say thank you to our other John, as well as Matt. Sorry, we were full of Mikes and Johns this segment. And Matt, you were the only one, but would like to thank my co-host for being here. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about Qualys, visit securityweekly.com/Qualys. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.